Hey folks, and welcome to the second episode of BSD Now, your weekly trip into the news, views, tutorials, and pretty much all things BSD. We have an exciting show coming at you today with an interview from Glen Barber of the FreeBSD Foundation and the Release engineering team, along with a new tutorial for creating your own package-ng repository with the Poudriere utility. So turn up the volume and hang with us for a while on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. Hey folks, after a wildly successful debut episode, BSD Now is back this week to talk with Glen Barber of the FreeBSD Release team and to show you how you can build your own binary package repository, and of course there's plenty of BSD news to discuss. So let's go ahead and get started with that now. Alan, what we got going on this week?
Quite a bit actually. In our top story, OpenBSD now has 64-bit time. Many operating systems face an upcoming challenge similar to but more complicated than Y2K, called Y2038. Because BSD and similar operating systems keep track of time by counting the number of seconds since January 1st, 1970, called the Unix epoch. And basically, in the year 2038, that value will reach the highest value you can store in a signed 32-bit integer. And the way a computer normally handles that is rolling, when you go past the maximum, it goes to the minimum value, which would be negative 2 billion. Which will set the time back to like 1900 or something like that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this is cool. They're actually getting on top of this a lot earlier than Y2K.
Yes.
But how much you want to bet people are still going to sell all their possessions and move to a mountain somewhere because of the pending computer crash?
Yeah. The interesting thing here is, while it seems like the simple solution would just be use a 64-bit integer to keep track of time, and then you don't have this problem. But what if in 2038 we're still, some embedded applications, like Raspberry Pis or something, or even smaller than that, are still 32-bit? Because, you don't necessarily need anything bigger than that or more complicated than that for certain embedded applications. Or, as we've seen now, there are things that have been built that just still work, and people don't necessarily upgrade their hardware just because there's newer things, right?
Well, sure. That's still quite a number of years in the future, so one would hope most of those things have been replaced by then.
But we can't guarantee that. So
no, we
when
can't.
OpenBSD decided to build their solution, they wanted a solution that would still work with 32-bit hardware. But part of it is they want the solution to apply now, and so they don't want the solution to be dependent on 64-bit hardware.
Oh, very cool. So it looks like Theo's going to be giving a keynote about this over at EuroBSD?
Yes, EuroBSDCon, which is in 2 weeks, actually. He's giving the keynote address about how he came up with the solution and how they implemented it.
And of course, I see a note here that none of the other BSDs have it, so we, of course, will have to borrow that here soon, right?
But it's kind of a big change. It introduces a binary incompatibility, and so it makes updating more difficult, right?
Sure. This is something I'll be interested to hear as keynote, just because we're on the heels of a 10 release here soon. Maybe this is something we can sneak in or put it in place for 11, so it's at least in pretty quick.
It seems like the kind of thing that would be great at the beginning of 11, because that's when you want to introduce all your big breaking changes.
Yeah, we kind of figure the binary incompatibility is going to change when we go from 10 to 11 anyway.
That's
so we might as well
the only time it's really allowed. So, it's easier to introduce it right at the beginning there than breaking 11 current down the road at some point to commit it.
Sure. Oh, very cool.
Because they make a couple of notes here that they say, updating to this kernel requires some extra work, and if you do it wrong, you won't be able to log in.
Oh, yeah, that's always a lot of fun when you reboot and nothing comes back, right?
So they're like, install from a snapshot instead of trying to just update in place. And if you try to upgrade by source, you're probably insane. And when the OpenBSD people say that,
wow,
that's saying something.
Did you get a quote on that? I mean, have we documented who said that?
it's in the official FAQ. It just says, upgrading from source is insane.
That is historical, guys. Make note of today. Very cool. Well, next up, it looks like we're looking at AES-NI pipelining getting a speed boost, and this is on FreeBSD, or is this on the other platforms as well?
This particular commit is FreeBSD, but the concept would apply to everybody else, so they're welcome to borrow the code. The basic concept here is that newer CPUs have what's called the AES new instruction. It's basically allows you to offload some of the work of encrypting something with AES to the CPU in hardware instead of having to do it all in software. Until now, those instructions were just sent to the CPU. Now, with pipelining support, it means you can build up a queue of the commands so that there's no lag between the instructions. Right? You're just saying do all of these instructions and then return.
So we're talking about pretty much native performance here now?
Getting more performance out of it anyway. And yeah, so it accelerates encryption and decryption if you have a CPU that supports it from AMD or Intel.
So on the FreeBSD side, is this going to go into the 9.2, or is this a 10 feature coming down the pike?
I'm not sure if it's included in 9.2 or not. It's fairly recent commit to head, last week. So
it'll be in 10.
Yeah, it probably won't make it for 9.2, but.
Well, that'll be handy. Even my laptop has that chipset on it,
Yeah.
my IBM T520, and we use PEFS for home directory encryption, which does the AES acceleration. So it'll be neat to get a speed increase on that.
So it also uses the SSE2 instruction set to calculate the tweak factor to increase performance even more.
Oh, very cool.
So when using GELI or GELI, the FreeBSD disk encryption system, they've got about 3 times the performance as they got before the code change.
So that's very significant. Yes. In other words, you want this and you want it now.
And so it means now the speed limit imposed by the CPU is less than the I/O limit imposed by the hard drive most times. So this is
great.
Letting you get almost no performance penalty for using disk encryption now. So you're encrypting the disk, but it's not costing you the performance that it used to.
Yeah, you're not seeing the hit that you used to take on it, which on older hardware you'll still see, of course, if you don't have this chipset, but anything new you're putting out will hopefully have this now.
And it looks like that performance could go up even more. They found just in the code change, if they were not involving GOM and the whole disk layer, they got even more performance. And that's now the bottleneck isn't the encryption performance, but GOM and GELI itself. That might mean now somebody will investigate that and will get even more performance.
Squeezing every last bit out of there as fast as we can. Exactly. That's great. So next up, we got OpenBSD 5.4 pre-orders now available.
Yes, OpenBSD raises their money to fund development by actually selling CDs. And so that's why they have the pre-orders, and it's kind of a bigger deal for them than it is for some other projects.
So it looks like every 6 months they do a new release, and of course, as typical OpenBSD, they're going to come out with a fun new song and a nice packaging set, artwork, etc. So can't wait to see what they come out for this release.
Yeah, and since they raised their money off selling the CDs, they put a little more effort into it than some projects.
Yeah, they're definitely really nice. Go ahead and take a look on their website, you guys, when you get a chance. There's some neat stuff up there.
And it looks like the official ISOs will be uploaded November 1st. But I guess you get it sooner if you order the CD.
Is that a source-based CD? Do I have to compile it? Okay.
Maybe one of the OpenBSD guys in the chat room can answer that.
That's right, they can. So next we're looking at GCC is officially bye-bye on current, no longer being built by default on a FreeBSD, I should mention.
So if you build from source, previously, it built for quite a while. It's built Clang, and it used GCC, and then they switched to Clang was the default, but their GCC was still installed as part of the base system. But on 10 current from, I guess, last week on, GCC isn't compiled at all unless you set a compiler flag to enable it.
And I believe the way this works, though, is if you still need a port or have a port that requires GCC, it'll suck that in via the ports tree. Is that the idea?
You can get newer GCC from the ports tree that way if you want. And there is a compile flag. If you want your base system to still include GCC for whatever reason, you can still do that for now. But I imagine after not so long, the horribly out-of-date version of GCC will be ripped out of the source tree entirely.
Yeah, and it's good to see it moving to Clang anyway, and getting all those last bugs fixed in time.
Yeah, and if you need GCC, that we have modern versions of GCC in the port tree, whereas using the one from 2007 is probably not a great idea anymore.
Yeah, not the best idea. But it's all about options. Now you got both. You can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, so for quite a while, Clang has been the default compiler in FreeBSD for compiling FreeBSD. But until this change, most people still compiled their ports with GCC. And now, thanks to the work of the ports team and Baptiste and all the people from package Poudriere, you can now build the entire port tree with Clang, except for a few very specific ports that will depend on GCC.
Just a couple holdouts out there, but that's really cool. That's neat to have that right in base now.
Yeah, and the fact that the entire port tree works with it now.
Very cool. So next up, we got a new patch just went out this week from Nicholas Zizig, I believe, is the one who announced it, on FreeBSD, updating Xorg and Mesa drivers. So this patch is going to be giving you guys some new Xorg drivers. They're expecting to commit it in about 2 weeks, so if you want to grab this ahead of time and test it, that would be cool. One of the things I'm most interested in playing with on it, though, is it allows you to use devd as opposed to HAL for doing your auto configuration of X and mice and etc. Really curious to see how that works, because the moment I can kill HAL and PCBSD, I'm a very happy man.
Yeah, and
in addition,
go ahead.
Oh, good. I was going to say, in addition, it looks like it's updating the Mesa stack to 9.1.6, libgl, DRI, etc. is getting updated. And, of course, it's going to enable the KMS for the AMD cards as well.
Right, and that's kind of a big thing we're pushing towards, especially for the release of 10, is being able to have that Radeon support by default.
Yeah, from a desktop perspective, that's been a big deal for us for a long time. We've just had to tell people NVIDIA or maybe Intel if you're lucky, but having ATI work would be really good.
And they put out an official call for testing, so they want to get some more testing done on the new Xorg stuff so that they can enable it by default in 10. So if you have a desktop machine and would like to try out the new Xorg and Mesa and KMS and so on, please do that and get in touch with them through the link we included in the show notes.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Please take a look at that, especially if you have a card that hasn't been supported in the past. I mean, the sooner you can get this tested and we can get it ready for 10, the better everyone is.
Yes, and we also want to make a note that OpenBSD is already actually upgraded to Mesa 9.2 for their stable version of Xorg. Apparently, FreeBSD is working on some driver support issues first to be able to get that far ahead.
Oh, cool. Okay, next up, it looks like we'll be getting ready for our tutorial here. While FreeBSD is well known for its extremely powerful and flexible ports collection, there's many cases where a user is just not going to want to manually compile software from source. If you're a FreeBSD user or you know one, just ask them what they had to do when they needed a copy of OpenOffice, for example. Usually not pretty pleasant. In addition, most people switching from other operating systems aren't used to compiling from source either. Typing make, install, and waiting is not usually what a user is going to expect when they just want to install Firefox or Apache or something. So enter the world of binary packages. By using a set of pre-compiled packages, we can make the upgrade to FreeBSD a bit more comfortable and long-term management much easier. They're a quick and great way to get a new system up and running and can be especially appealing when you're dealing with large-scale deployments. In the tutorial today, we're going to teach you how to configure your own binary package building server and how to use it to distribute packages to your clients. It's recommended, of course, to do this on a system with a fast CPU and a decent amount of memory. We'll be using the package-ng system and a mass port building tool called Poudriere, which we have mentioned. And while we were going to mention FreeBSD specifically today, this will also work for Dragonfly BSD users as well. Now, as for the term Poudriere, don't ask us how to pronounce it. I think Baptiste is probably the only person in the world who knows how.
Well, I imagine anybody who speaks French does, right?
Right. Maybe they can say it right. I'm sure I'm butchering it. So what exactly is Poudriere? To quote the documentation, Poudriere is a BSD2 licensed tool primarily designed to test package production on FreeBSD. However, most people are going to find it useful to build ports on FreeBSD in bulk. Its goals are to use modern facilities present in FreeBSD to be able to easily use it and depend only on the base and, of course, be parallel. In other words, if you're on a nice system with 16 CPUs, we can be building 16 packages concurrently.
The nice thing is it does those in jails so they can't interfere with each other.
And it even does all the dependency resolution, figures out I need to build X and Y before I can build Z, and it just does it. It's pretty smart. We're going to go ahead and install this here on a building machine, tell it what ports we want to build, and then install a web server to distribute the files today. This, of course, is going to assume you already have a FreeBSD 8.3 or newer system installed with the current ports tree. So let's go ahead and get started, Alan, by installing the tool, and we're going to get some configuration files in place.
So I just showed us installing it, and now I'm editing the config file. Poudriere is pretty powerful. It can take advantage of a number of different systems. One of those is ZFS, which makes managing the jails with cloning the base jail many times a lot faster. But in my virtual machine, I haven't set up ZFS, so I set the option that I don't have ZFS, and it'll work around that.
Okay. For those who are curious, this is what we use in PCBSD land to build all our ISOs and packages as well. Poudriere with ZFS and a lot of memory.
Yeah, I have a similar system for building the packages for the edge servers for Scale Engine. We used to build the 100 or so packages we needed on each edge server when we installed it, and it only took about 40 minutes. It wasn't bad, but with package ng it takes 6 minutes.
Yeah, definitely, and then distributing is probably far easier.
And making sure all of them stay upgraded is much easier as well.
Oh, very cool.
Poudriere also supports TempFS, which allows you to, depending on your setup and your system, to possibly build everything in RAM and never touch the disk at all.
That's what we do in our system. I think it's 196 gigabytes of memory. We fire off 16 builders, and we can even roll OpenOffice in there. It's pretty cool.
My machine's got more CPU but less RAM, so I use 24 builders at once, but I only have 96 gigs of RAM.
Oh, only, right, Alan?
Yeah. Well, compared to you, it's only.
Wow.
And so by default, Poudriere will fork one jail for each CPU you have based on the NCPU count from sysctl. And instead of using, make -j a whole bunch of times to try to speed things up and risk breaking things, it'll just build as many packages as it can concurrently, which is also a very interesting stress test on your machine.
Sure it is. Another interesting thing to mention with that is if you don't want to use all the CPUs, if this is a system doing something else, you can set an option and say I only want to use 8 of my 16
or something like that,
any number you set.
Yep. So once you have Poudriere installed, which is very simple, it's all shell scripts if I recall correctly, you've configured it, then the first thing you need is to create a ports tree. So Poudriere doesn't use your system's port tree, it makes its own in case you need to do things to it or whatever, and it makes it easier to keep it up to date. So if we just do Poudriere ports -c, and this will create a new ports tree. So it'll fetch the ports tree from with PortSnap and extract it, which takes a little bit. So I've already done that on the other machine. And then the next step is to create your jail. So Poudriere uses a one jail for each. So it makes a base jail and then clones that as many times as it needs to create the separate jails for running concurrent builds. So
typically a jail would be a type of system as well. So we would have a jail for our 9 packages, one for our 10, 8, etc., and then architecture.
Exactly. One of the interesting things is that with this, you can compile for multiple versions of FreeBSD from one machine. Right? So you can create a jail for 9.1 and a jail for 9.2 and a jail for current and so on.
Yeah, that's how we've been doing ours for a while, and it's been pretty handy to have it all in one system with one command.
And so to do that, it just by default installs the base FreeBSD from the FTP site. Of course, I can't spell fancy French words correctly today. My fingers know how to do it, my brain doesn't. So yes, in this case it will download the base 9.1 system from the FTP site and install it.
How far back does that go? Is there a version of FreeBSD you have to be on in particular?
I'm not sure. With the kernel compatibility, generally, I know the official build clusters run current, and then you can always go as far back as you want if your main system is up to date. If your host is like 9.1, I'm not sure you could build 10 packages on it because some of the kernel stuff is different.
That makes sense.
So yeah, well, that's once that's done, you can also update a jail, right? Because after you've installed your 9.1 jail, at some point 9.1 gets an update. So then you can do your Poudriere jail, and instead of -C to create one, you use -U to update one. And so I'll do that on...
This would come in handy too if you're building kernel modules or something from the ports tree, and you need to rebuild those on a newer version of FreeBSD.
I forgot I uninstalled Poudriere again. But yeah, so you can see here it's going to use FreeBSD update to actually update the jail in place. So that means you're doing a nice small binary update, and it should be nice and quick.
That's almost too easy. That's cheating, Alan. That's really cool, though. Yeah. And those are usually FreeBSD is going to issue security patches, mostly with FreeBSD update. And then that's about all they do with it at the moment.
Yes,
and then if you're going to do a major release, you could upgrade from 9.1 to 9.2, etc.
Right. But for your Poudriere, you'd probably just use the jail -C and create a new 9.2
Just create a new
jail.
one.
So once that's done, the next thing we have to do is create the make files. So in the Poudriere directory, you can create a different make file for each of your different jails so that you can have different options. You can also get into more depth with Poudriere and create sets. So you can have, for example, I have 3 different sets of packages with different options that I can pile all against a 9.1 kernel for different types of servers in my case. Right? I have different roles, so I need different software and different package options on each one of those.
So that would be like the different port flags
Yeah.
and stuff. Some things need IPv6, some things not, etc. Okay.
So the bare minimum you need if you're doing package ng is just putting that the flag with package ng equals yes in your make.conf. If you don't include that, Poudriere can actually build the old style package_add packages. So if you want to use those for whatever reason, Poudriere can help you build those as well.
Recommend you just use package ng.
Package
though.
ng
It's a lot
is
easier
much
to
nicer.
distribute them.
And it supports upgrading where package add doesn't. In package add, upgrading means uninstall it and install the new one and deal with all the complications manually, whereas package ng is much nicer that way. Okay. Now you can add more to your make.conf, right? Anything you would normally put in your make.conf. On my headless servers, I usually do, without X11. So if anything I'm installing has any option to make a graphical interface, I don't want that because it's a headless server. But if you're building for a desktop, you wouldn't include that.
Yeah, that's where we go ahead and say we want cups on everywhere. We'd like GUIs.
And so on and so forth. So the next thing to do is actually to select what you want to build. Right? So we just make a little file here we'll call the Poudriere-list, which would basically just be a list of the packages that we want to compile. Poudriere supports the option of building everything in the ports tree, but building 25,000 apps will take a while and you probably don't need most of them. So instead, you can provide your own list, right? So we can just say we want Firefox and RTorrent and, I don't know, a window manager. We'll go i3.
Why not?
Get Cowsay, because, everybody loves ASCII art. And IRC client and something useful like tmux.
There you
So
go.
this is just a list of port origins, the path you would find this thing in the ports tree, so category/name.
And if you need a web way to look them up again, freshports.org.
Yes, Dan Langill's website is very helpful for searching. There's also tools in the ports tree to search the port tree, but you have to find them first. Also, in the text version of the tutorial that'll be up on our website, there's also the commands to use like portmaster to get a list of what you already have installed. So if you want to do an upgrade, you can say, hey, rather than manually searching, why don't I just have my package database give me a list of the origins of all the apps I already have.
And the cool thing is once you feed that to Poudriere, it's going to figure out if there's new dependencies it needs to suck in, etc.
So now is one of the other powerful things of Poudriere is setting options. So we can specify Poudriere options and then sysutils/tmux, and it gives us the ports options dialog. And we can decide which compile time options we want to have for tmux. And you can set those system-wide per jail, so which would be, for 9.1 or 9.2 or whatever, per set, or even per jail per set. So you can say this only applies to this jail with this particular set, or this applies to all jails, or whatever. And you can basically end up with a hierarchy of a bunch of different make.confs that all get applied and provide the options you want.
So you don't need one master ugly make.conf file with a gazillion
right, so you can
statements?
have a default one that applies to every jail, and then you can have one that applies only to this jail, and one that applies only to this set, or this set in this jail.
Very cool.
And so, you can have one that applies to your 32-bit and 64-bit builds, and then some that are specific to one or the other. And it's pretty cool. And if you do a more complicated, this will even go through all the dependencies. So you can pre-configure all the options for Firefox and everything Firefox depends on.
Which is pretty handy, especially if you're building some of those graphical apps. Firefox, good example. It bit us for a while that you had to compile one of its dependencies with cups.
Yes.
Otherwise, Firefox couldn't find printers. How annoying is that?
So if you don't set an option, it'll just use the default, so the options that are on or off when the dialog first pops up. But this way you can override them for specific apps and have custom, when I compile rsync, I always do it with the time limit patch, because I'm doing some cron tab ones where I want to, you can run for 45 minutes and then then you're done. And then, at the top of the hour, another cron tab starts or whatever. So once you've done that, you move on to using the bulk command, which is for bulk building, right? So you just specify, I want to build using my 9.1 64-bit jail, and you provide the your list file that has all of your packages you want to build, and it will create that reference jail, which has the base system that we installed, and it'll replicate that once for every CPU that you want to use, and it'll figure out what order to compile the dependencies in and start going. So it looks at the list of apps and figured out what are the common dependencies, so I'll build all of those first, and it tries to build as many things concurrently as it can. And they put a lot of...
It does a good job of it, too.
Yes, they put a lot of work into it so that when they're building the entire port tree like you do for PCBSD, that you're not done, you don't finish everything and then spend the last hour waiting for it to finish building LibreOffice.
Sure, yeah. It actually gets those done pretty early in the process.
Yeah. So it looks at...
This is where all the magic's going to happen, though. If you're running a Poudriere build server, you're just going to be doing this command over and over and over after you've updated your ports tree.
So that's the next thing. Once you've built all of your packages, it makes a directory that you can publish with your web server, and you point the package.ng client on all of your systems to it, and it'll install the apps, and you're good to go. But a week or two later, it's time to update. Right?
Yep.
So now, we'll just let that stop. We can now do Poudriere ports -u, and this will update your ports tree. So it'll go out to your, with port snap, and get all the latest ports, which, maybe has the newer version of Firefox or whatever it is you want to install.
Yeah. The daily version of Chrome, it seems.
And now, when you do Poudriere bulk again, it will only build the packages where the package or dependency has changed. So it'll basically let you do an incremental build. So you don't have to recompile everything.
It's good about figuring out, in addition, if like a make option has changed. Maybe the ports maintainer added a new flag.
Yep. Or if you went and changed the Poudriere options and said, oh, last time I forgot to include that cups thing for Firefox. Now that I've done that, it'll rebuild Firefox and that dependency and anything else that depends on that dependency, and you end up with a nice, clean port tree.
Speaking from experience, this has made it a lot more simple for us. It used to stink to have to rebuild everything all over again.
Yeah, with the old Tinderbox way. I remember previously they had this complicated system where they would try to use a bunch of different machines to build everything, and it would take them quite a few days to get it one build done. Now, with a single modern server, they can build the entire ports tree in a day. And so that's a big achievement. And then with the incremental building, you don't have to do that every day anymore. You can cut down that time and have a much more up-to-date tree. Another interesting thing is that you can do package signing with this. Well, it's not exactly package signing, but pretty close.
Right? We'll just call it package signing for the purposes of this.
So you generate an SSL certificate, and you can it basically signs the digest file, which contains the SSH 256 of each of the packages. So it's as good as signing all the packages without having to go through the effort of signing all the packages.
We should mention this is a package NG feature as well. This is not for the older style.
Yeah, the older style package system wouldn't understand that.
This is what we do on our repo as well. We just sign everything to make sure you're getting something legit from our build box.
Right. So there's one tar file that just contains metadata. It's basically the SSH256 hash of every package, and then basically you sign that file, and then you know that the signature you're getting is the list of signatures is valid because it's signed by the key you trust, and then you can use that to match against the signatures of the downloaded files.
Checksum.
Just like the ports tree does basically the same thing. You're downloading the port snap update, which is signed. You verify that signature, and then you know that all of the checksums that are in the ports tree are valid because they came from port snap, which was signed.
Ditto when you build the actual port, we have all the checksums of the actual source as well to make sure that hasn't been tampered with on the remote side.
Yeah. So now, if I haven't set up a web server on this because it's kind of a waste of time. But if we just make a little package directory, I can copy some of these packages we just built. Or actually, I don't think they finished building, did they? We stopped it. 1 sec.
I think you killed it partway through.
Let that build. We can copy those finished packages. 91x64. I'm doing all this off the top of my head. Aren't I amazing?
That is really cool.
Oops. Of course, the one thing I got wrong was the IP address. The problem with doing paths off the top of your head is you get them wrong.
Well, for those who wonder, this is pretty much verbatim what we're doing for the PCBSD package.
I spelled Poudriere
trees that we maintain.
Or something else too, probably. As you do. There we go. And now I can just use package add and... Oh, right.
No way it goes, right?
Helps if I hadn't already done this to make sure it worked first. There. So I copy the files and I can do package add and it installs tmux that we just compiled on the other machine.
And this could be scripted out for, of course, a bunch of systems if you need to do it that way. I think even Puppet may have some support for packages.
There's a module for Puppet. We use that extensively now. When I give my talk about using Puppet to manage FreeBSD at BSDCan, I was still doing the port install, compile everything system. And then the presentation directly after mine was Baptiste about using Poudriere to build your own packages. After watching that,
there you go.
I go home 3 days later, everything we do is package NG.
That's one of the great things about going to conferences. It's like you come home and you learn so much.
Even when you're going there to teach things to people, you still come home with more than you went with. And
you have no idea how many times I've gone and given a talk, and then at the end of the talk, somebody comes up to me and says, "That's neat, but have you seen this?" And then I go home and rewrite whatever
it's like,
we're talking about.
No, I hadn't. So now, thanks for that, but I have to do it all over again.
I come home with more work than I left with. It's wonderful. Join us today. We're going to be interviewing Glen Barber, recently added to the FreeBSD Foundation. He also serves on the release engineering team for FreeBSD, and we got a lot of good stuff to discuss with him. So let's go ahead and give a listen. Hey, Glen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so Glen, we'll go ahead and get this started, but first, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role with the project is, pet projects, what you got going on.
All right, so I got involved with the FreeBSD project primarily as a hobbyist around 2007 or so. I annoyed enough people with my patches that I was granted a commit bit in 2010, and I've been contributing wherever I can ever since. I was added to the documentation engineering team just over a year ago, and joined the cluster admin and the release engineering teams within the past year or so.
Oh, that's fantastic. And for those listening, that's how you get a commit bit. Just don't go away, and eventually they'll throw one at you. Trying to get you involved.
Keep submitting patches and PRs, and eventually they'll be like, just do it yourself already.
That's right. I'm tired of committing his stuff.
That's exactly how it goes.
Yep.
So right now we're finishing up the 9.2 release. We just started the 10.0 release cycle.
Looking forward to that a lot, by the way.
I can't wait. On the side, doing some work with ARM snapshots, specifically Raspberry Pi is what I'm using to test the initial parts. To have hopefully weekly snapshots of those available.
Oh, fantastic. Are you doing anything with packages on those by any chance?
Not yet. I still have to work through the QEMU emulation, mostly figure out what it is that I'm doing wrong. Something in my environment isn't quite working the way I was expecting it to. So right now the package builds that I tried to do didn't work. But I'm positive it's something on my side.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Look forward to seeing that work too.
Yeah, that would be a huge bonus to have packages available.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the last couple trade shows we've gone to, I've taken a Pi, and you put that on the desk, you just set it up, and all these Linux guys come over and like, wow, you can run FreeBSD on ARM? Like, when did that happen? Right?
Yeah, it's our best kept secret, I think.
That's right.
Well, we'll see what we can do about changing that.
Yes.
So how did you come about being on the release engineering team?
I joined the release engineering team in January of this year. For several months before that, I was doing weekly snapshots of the current and the stable branches, and really fell into it by accident.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how long ago it was. It must have been over a year ago. Somebody within the development community mentioned about snapshots that were non-existent, and it turned out to be a lack of time for the snapshot generation. So I started tinkering with it, and that's how I got involved into how the release process actually works, and basically set up my own scripts to build on my own hardware, build some snapshots basically as a test case, or as a proof of concept, really. And a few months later, there was a call for recruits on the developers list, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the people that joined the team.
Oh, very cool. So what kind of actual decisions and tasks are you doing with RE specifically, for those who don't know how FreeBSD manages this?
So the way it works is once we implement the code freeze, any patches to whatever specific branch that we're working on at the time need to have explicit release engineering approval for commit. So the developer that wants to commit the change sends it to us, we review it, and either approve it or deny it with the explanation of why we're going to deny the change. Basically what we want to make sure is that we what we'd like to do is take the tree in a known good state, and at that point basically fix any problems that may exist. Rather than adding new features to it, we try to focus on any existing problems or any known issues. We just keep track of any incoming user complaints, if regressions between let's say 9.1 and whatever the latest 9.2 is at the time. Right now it's RC3, and go from there. We have to decide, is whatever somebody is reporting, is this going to be a huge problem for people upgrading, or is this something that's trivial to fix? Stuff like that. It's really a code management, process.
And quality management as well, right? You want to make sure that anything that's going to be a significant change isn't introduced at the last minute, because then it won't have enough testing.
Of course.
Do you guys actually maintain some hardware for testing yourselves, or you rely on the community for that?
We do have some machines. I personally have a few machines that I use to test. I run FreeBSD current on all of my systems, so I try to make sure as much as possible I could find problems before anybody else does. We don't have the hardware for we don't have the hardware for testing every device driver, every drive controller, stuff
just
like that.
Random combinations of devices that can interact in odd ways.
Yeah, that's right now we don't have. I really don't know if there are any plans for this in the future. But right now we don't have the ability to possibly test everything. So we, for the most part, right now do rely on people testing out the betas and the RCs that do come out.
Well, you heard that. If there's a problem, you need to try and test it while it's in RC and beta, so that you can let these guys know and fix it.
Yeah, that's the big thing that what happened. What seems to me happens is the beta 1 comes out, and some reports will come trickling in, but then by the time we're in the RC3, for example, then I think by then a large chunk of the people that are going to upgrade have at least tested it on some hardware. So I think as long as when we get to the RC point, I think in general, if we haven't found anything serious by then, we're probably in good shape.
Yeah, and for testing, it's quite easy. With FreeBSD Update, you can upgrade from like a 9.1 release to 9.2 RC3, and it's only really one reboot. And then going from that release candidate to the final release when it comes out a couple weeks later is also just that easy. And so there's not much of a reason not to be testing the release candidates.
And even with hypervisors and virtual machine systems like UVMU, VirtualBox, what I've done recently is taken the weekly snapshots I've been building. I've been taking the resulting user land from those snapshots and writing the install world into a sparse file, and you can download the image on XZ, the file, and you have a ready to go disk image that you can attach to a VM with almost no problem. I've had, I think, one or two people say that with Parallels they had to do some magic to get one of the VMDK files to attach, but other than that, it was hopefully it's not a case of nobody's using them, but other than that, I haven't really had any.
Where are you actually publishing these?
They're on if you go to the FreeBSD FTP site, they're under the they're under the snapshots directory. It's a VM-images directory, and then I have AMD64 and i386 images in there.
And helpfully he tweets every time he updates them, so you always know where to go look for new ones.
Yes. Yeah. What I do is I'll post it to the FreeBSD snapshots mailing list and I'll include the hashes for the images, and then there's the link for downloading the ISOs and downloading the VM images.
Yep. Speaking of FTP, why is it that the regular release images are under pub FreeBSD releases and then AMD64/AMD64?
So the reason for that is so if you look at if you go to the top level source directory and you do a make targets, you'll see we can do you'll see all of the combinations of architectures and hardware that we can generate that are supported. So rather than having and this really isn't so much applicable for AMD 64 and i386, but for the ARM architectures, for example, there's 4 different hardware types that we can build for. So rather than having AMD 64, i386 plus those 4 in the top level directory, the structure was reorganized. So you have a top level directory for the machine type, and then you have the architecture underneath. So you have ARM/ARMv6, ARM/ARM6EB, I think.
So it's like kind of like class and then a specific type.
I think it's processor type and then hardware type. So you have a 64-bit system, that would be the AMD 64, or actually this is probably a better idea than their explanation. So you have 32-bit, and then the 32-bit processors we support are the PC98 and the i386, like your general Intel processor.
That actually helps. I'd always wondered why it was that way and never poked around enough to figure it out on my own. Well, hey, is there any new cool standout features or things you're excited about in 9.2 coming down the pike?
The majority of the changes that I've been going through the commit history for the stable 9 branch past few days. There's some changes to the VirtIO system, some updates there, which I hope get a lot of attention. But for the most part, it's really driver updates and bug fixes, which is good. Which that means that basically people updating from 9.1 to 9.2 can expect shouldn't expect any surprises, and hopefully everything will just work for them.
Well, yes, because VirtIO is a fairly big thing if you're trying to run FreeBSD in Beehive, or any virtualization really, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I haven't had a need personally to run anything using it, but from what I understand, the performance increase is significant enough.
Has anybody tried benchmarking that or plans to, and post the results for 9.2 when it releases?
That's a good question. I haven't. That's not anything that I've seen. I would like to know if somebody has done that though.
Yeah, that would be good with the PR, I guess.
And I guess the other big thing for 9.2 is the upgrade to the feature flags for ZFS.
Yes, that's right. That is included too. I forgot about that.
That'll definitely be a big one.
That's why all my machines want 9.2. That's why we have a bunch of RC3 machines running in production at the moment. Because we really, really, really wanted feature flags.
Yes. Yeah, they're definitely. I personally like the LZ4 compression, although I don't know if that's in 9.2 or not. I haven't gotten that.
Yeah, it's
but for me, one of the biggest things is just some of the other quality of life improvements to ZFS, like deleting a range of snapshots instead of having to do them one at a time, and a bunch of little things like that. And the new verbosity stuff, where you can actually have it estimate how much space you'll save by deleting a range of snapshots, or when doing a ZFS send, how big the delta between this snapshot and that snapshot is. And I've actually been writing a patch for a little shell script that helps you manage the replication, so you actually get a progress bar. Since you know how big the delta is going to be, you can have an idea how long it's going to take, or what percentage of it is done already.
Yes,
but speaking of features that I personally have a big investment in, is
Here it comes.
the changes to TCP for the initial congestion window to send 10 packets instead of 2 off the start of a TCP connection. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I don't remember offhand the specific reasons for the concern for that change. One reason I do recall coming up was the name experimental in the OID. So when we have something like that where it's experimental now, but it's not going to be experimental in the future, what we try to avoid doing is renaming something like that in the middle of a branch. So that's merged from head into stable 9, and now we have this, it's eventually going to need to be changed. That was one of the current concerns. Obviously, it's not a technical concern. Like I said, I don't remember the specifics behind the reason for it, but the decision to turn that off was made kind of at the last minute we don't want to accidentally introduce a regression somewhere, so we're not going to remove it completely, but we're just going to turn it off, and it's there if people want to try it out and use it, which we certainly encourage. But we don't want to get into a situation where we release 9.2 with this enabled, and we find that all the whatever problems that might arise, and then we would rather have it off by default and then let the people let everybody enable it rather than forcing it enabled and
It breaks the internet.
I can't. Exactly. I boot up a system, I plug in the Ethernet, and then my machine panics.
Right, or in this case, it would be every FreeBSD machine on the internet, talks too fast and floods people on the internet and increases global internet congestion or something like that.
Yeah.
I assume this is on by default in 10 right now. Is it causing any problems up there, as far as you're aware?
Not that I'm aware of, no. And like I said earlier, I run current on all of my systems, so I'm certain I would have noticed something unusual with it. But I don't stuff like that. I have whatever it's shipped with, which this is enabled in current. I've had no reason to turn it off.
But again, I guess your use case is a little different, right? This is kind of aimed towards web servers where, we're dealing with hundreds of requests per second in new sockets, and so it...
Yeah, I doubt my website is interesting enough that I'm getting that much traffic.
Wait until next Netflix turns it on, then see what happens,
exactly.
Right?
Because so you mentioned about the renaming is because I read in the commit log that once this is a ratified internet standard by the Internet Engineering Task Force, it will change from experimental.initcwin to the RFC number that it's assigned. And so
right. So what we try to avoid doing is like mysteriously renaming stuff, and especially in a stable branch, because we don't want somebody upgrading their stable machine and have this off intentionally for whatever reason, and then they reboot and now it's enabled because they have they have the old entry in their configuration.
Right, yeah, in their sysctl.conf it says enable or disable this sysctl, and then because of the rename that sysctl doesn't exist and it gets enabled, and it's not what they were expecting. And
do you see how much care goes into making sure this stuff works for people down the road in future? I mean, this is
this is what the release engineering that makes this different than a lot of other OSs is that they take the time and are awfully conservative to make sure that when you upgrade, nothing unexpected happens.
And as a developer, let me just thank you publicly for the work you guys do, because that's the kind of stuff that makes my life easier. And I know for a lot of other vendors around the world, same thing, man.
And hopefully, we try not to introduce anything unexpected as much as possible, and that's where I encourage people to test. We do have snapshots available regularly. If you're able to fire up a VM, I really encourage it, because we want to make sure that if there's a long window of time between any point release, 9.1 to 9.2, or especially .0 releases. There's almost a 2-year time frame between 9.0 and 10.0. That's 2 years of changes. So whenever possible, we really encourage people to test out whenever they can, because it's a huge help. And every report is helpful. Even if it's an email saying this works great, that's definitely good.
Yeah, sometimes silence doesn't necessarily tell you that everything's okay.
Yeah. Are people testing this, or
And that's what you have to add, that you have to wonder that are people using this? I haven't received any complaints, but that doesn't mean that it's actually being used. So
sure.
The emails that I've personally received about the snapshots, I'm very happy with the results. We get on mailing lists. We'll get somebody that can't boot, one specific revision. So I'll email them and say, can you try this snapshot and see if this boots? And if it does, then we know kind of where the problem is. We have a 1-week window to work with rather than a 2-year window.
Well, and as you were saying, people testing out the snapshots or the release candidates in a VM is useful, but at the same time, you also need people to be testing the upgrade process and make sure that when you're going from 9.1 to 9.2, that there's not any surprises.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the release schedule for 9.2, I noticed that release candidate 4 was added to the schedule. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yes. So there was a report of NFS-related deadlocks, and when I'm hoping I get the time frame right here. When I believe it was right when I started doing the RC3 builds, it was found that the commit that reverted the change that we thought was suspect turned out to be just masking the problem. So it didn't actually fix the deadlocks, but it just kind of solved them for this one specific case. So RC3 came out, and then we decided, well, we're going to review the actual problem, and I think we have a patch or two that's being tested now for the RC4. So what we in general what we want to do is, when we get to the final release candidate, we don't want to have any changes from that point until we don't want to have any changes between the last RC and the
right,
actual
because any
release.
change there would end up not being tested before it went out.
Sure.
Right.
You just need a purely name change.
Right. So because assuming everything is fine with everything, the review of the actual NFS deadlock fix, assuming everything's fine, we want to make sure that we do get some testing between RC3 and the release point before we actually name the 9.2 release.
Oh, very cool. Well, shifting gears a little bit here, talk to us a little bit about your snapshot releases for current and stable. How often, how frequent? Are you building them with any special options, special kernel flags, anything in particular we should take note of?
There aren't excuse me, there aren't any special flags. What I'm doing is basically build world, build kernel, and then a make release. And for the kernel and world builds, for the world builds, I'll use the number of CPUs on the machine. And for the kernel builds, I'll use half of that, just because that's really how I've always done it. There's no reason for it. But that's the only non-default thing I'm doing.
And you're offering that in the AMD 64 and ARM variety, 32-bit as well, or anything else?
Not ARM yet. I'm still working on the ARM.
Okay.
On the ARM stuff right now, it's AMD 64, i3-6, PowerPC 64, Spark 64, and IA 64.
Cool.
So all the big iron hardware architectures we have weekly snapshots for. They're in FTP.freebsd.org/pub/freebsd/snapshots. and then that'll give you the top level directory of all the architectures. They're generated weekly. I typically start the builds Friday evening or Saturday morning. Once they're done, I'll test them out, and I test them out as best as I can. I'm obviously not able to, with the time frame, I'm not able to test every little thing, unfortunately. But I'll do some basic testing, and then if everything looks good, I'll put them on, stage them onto the main FTP server, and then from that point, it's really about 10 hours before they're propagated to all of the mirrors, and then on Monday morning or thereabout, I'll send out the email that the snapshots are ready.
Do you have a number of people already using these to find and fix bugs in current, for example?
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said earlier, we'll have somebody report a problem on one of the mailing lists. I'll point them to a snapshot if it applies to the problem. If it's like a CD doesn't boot or something like that, point them to the snapshot directory and ask them to try out one of the images there. And there've been a number of cases where I've done that, and the responses were fantastic. Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether or not it solved the problem, the fact that the images were there was definitely.
That's a huge first hurdle to overcome right there, not having to go and recompile.
Yeah, it's a lot friendlier than telling a person, well, sync it from source and go recompile this and come back in 2 days.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, current's not building properly with this right now. So, yeah, much easier.
Yeah, that was, I mean, so about 2 years ago, it was actually, whenever I can, I try to look at, the problems from, not as a developer point of view, but as a user. What do I expect as a user? One of the problems I ran into was I was setting up a new machine, and I had the machine had a ALC driver, Athros Ethernet, and there were two snapshots that I had to choose from that were available on FTP at the time. I believe this was 9.0 current at the time. The latest one available had a problem where when I plugged in the Ethernet, the machine would panic. The snapshot prior to that did not have ZFS version 28 yet. So what I wanted was a full ZFS system with a RAID Z3. So I couldn't use the one that didn't have version 28 because I wouldn't be able to boot from the RAID Z3, and I couldn't really do anything with the other snapshots. So as I was waiting for, I basically installed the one that would panic when I would plug in the Ethernet, and then sync my source tree to a USB thumb drive, and then copy the files over through SneakerNet. Plug the USB drive in and update the source tree that way. So I wanted that. That's really the longer backstory to how I got involved to doing this, because that got me looking into how the release process worked. And I basically started out by making images for myself. Just because the functionality is there. I could do it. It's easy to do. You run a command and you have a bootable a flash drive that, if in a worst case scenario, if I can't get my laptop to boot from the drive, I can pop in the USB stick and do some recovery that way. So when I see stuff like that, I try to look at it from the user point of view. Is what do I expect to happen? And I'll tell you the responses from having the snapshots available is just fantastic.
Definitely.
And actually, at the time, I didn't know. I wasn't aware of the snapshots on allbsd.org. Those are, I believe, they're still generated daily. So if people are looking for a daily snapshot to build, that's the
Cool.
place to go.
So looking at that, is there the possibility in the future sometime that you could upgrade to snapshots with something like FreeBSD Update?
I hope so. So I haven't looked at the FreeBSD Update code in probably a year and a half now, so I don't remember the specific details on how it works. But so from the release engineering side, we don't actually do the FreeBSD Update builds themselves.
Right.
The way it works is we'll do the builds for the whether it's a beta or an RC or the actual release. We'll take the images, the disk 1 images, and we'll put them somewhere where they're fetchable from the internet, and then we'll email the security team with the hashes of those images. So they fetch the images, they verify the hashes, and then they run the FreeBSD update part on their side with different machines. So I don't know if there's anything technically preventing us from doing it. I just know it's there's two teams involved with it, so it's really I don't want to say it's a matter of manpower, but manpower is definitely a consideration when going into that side of things. I would certainly like
which tasks belong to which people, for example, and push them forward that way.
Yeah, it's anything. If we were to do that, it would certainly be more work for the security team, which we don't want to unnecessarily put work on other teams like that. But personally, I would really like it if we had FreeBSD update for the stable and the current branches. That would be something definitely.
Well, I guess the first problem with that is with the way FreeBSD update works, you need a version number, a release name, or something to upgrade from and to, and -stable doesn't really fit that. So I guess you'd have to.
Well, we've kind of solved that because we're doing our own stable releases and offering updates with FreeBSD update, and so we just flag it as 9 stable and then just do -P1, P2, P3, and we update that once a month and push out the code to our FreeBSD update server. That seems to be working.
That might work. Yeah, or date tag it, or just revision number of the SV entry at the time, or whatever.
Sure. And so what we've done on our website is when you go to the address, it just says -P2 was stable from this date in this snapshot.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Easy enough too.
Yeah, it was pretty simple to set it up that way. I don't want things to be too complicated.
Right.
Well, cool. Well, speaking of the base system here a little bit, I had an interesting question here. Are there any plans? I know we've talked about this off and on at conferences, but are there any plans to remove bind from the base system in the works?
Finally, there is. Well, right now, LDNS and I believe parts of Unbound are being ported into the base system from Des and Peter are working on that. Hopefully, I don't really at this point I don't see any reason why this won't happen. But we're expecting bind to be taken out of the base system for FreeBSD 10.0 release.
Oh, woohoo! Fantastic.
That'll eliminate about a third of all security announcements, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking, how many less patches do I have to commit now? Very good. What's so the two you mentioned, is that going to be the replacement? Is that the plan going forward?
That's going to be the replacement. That's going to be the replacement for 10.0. I don't know the specifics. I think there's work. There's other solutions being looked into for the FreeBSD 11.0. I don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure if that's correct at this point. Some of the functionality from bind doesn't exist in LDNS, for example. Like the dig utility doesn't. There's no.
Sure.
I mean, there's the drill utility, but that's not a complete. It's not a drop-in replacement. So some magic has to happen there for replace the missing functionality.
Are we still looking at a very similar configuration for just an end user perspective? Is etcresolve.conf going away or getting manipulated in some way?
That's still a work in progress. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen with that. The resolve conf stuff and if you have a laptop and you move networks, you shut down, you open up your laptop in another location and plug in Ethernet into a completely different network, getting the DHCP lease, stuff like that still has to be worked out with in the RC scripts. They're still a work in progress, so I don't have an exact answer for you just yet.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. That sounds like some interesting, exciting stuff
Yes.
for 10.
Yeah, I've been using Unbound and LDNS on some of my stuff, not from the base system. I've been using it from ports, and I'm quite happy with it. It's simple enough to configure, and once you have it up and running, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And as Glenn has just shown, 10 cannot get here soon enough.
I'm really looking forward to 10.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to have I can't wait to have a complete feature list. Right now I'm there's 2 years of commit logs that need to be gone through, so I don't have every notable update offhand, but 10 does.
Yeah,
really.
that's an interesting question I don't have written down here. Is who writes the nice little release notes doc that comes out with each release?
HRS Hiroki does, and
Okay.
he's, as long as I can remember, he's been doing it. I'm positive he's been doing it far before I was even involved in FreeBSD back in the day. It's really you sit down and you go through n number of months of commits and pick the ones that are notable.
Yeah, for a .0 release, that's got to be a lot of work.
Yeah. Yes.
So, onto a different topic for the more, I won't say paranoid, I don't know the right word to describe the people, but for some people that really prefer their OS not to have any proprietary binary blobs, do you see a future where there's a source like conf option to not use the non-open source Wi-Fi firmwares and things like that?
And still expect the driver to work?
I suppose not, actually.
For some value of works.
I don't see why that wouldn't be possible now. I'm sure that would have to be something that would have to get reviewed, but I would imagine that would be possible to do with minor changes to the the source tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I could certainly see where it would be a good idea to have it in there. I'm actually surprised that it's not right now.
It's just a feature that no one's had a particular need to not have a certain Wi-Fi driver, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, hey, so we heard recently that you've joined the FreeBSD Foundation. So we wanted you to kind of give us a little bit of information about that, what that means for users, what you're doing over there, and what the FreeBSD Foundation's doing.
So for the foundation, basically what that means is that I will have improved communication during the release process because there's going to be somebody that actually has the time to sit down and coordinate with everybody involved. Now there's dedicated time towards to have spent on the release cycle, which is a definite bonus on for the project, because you don't have to worry about whether or not this volunteer is going to have time to read email this day. There's somebody there focusing on that part of the project.
Yeah, it's be a difference there now that it's the schedule might be a little easier to keep track of when you're not depending on volunteers to be able to have the time they need to do it.
Yeah.
Specifically when the release cycle's in its high point.
Right.
So is that part of then what you're doing for the foundation, is keeping the releases on schedule and making sure things happen in a timely manner?
Trying to. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that the release schedules for the 9.2 and the 10.0 are very, very aggressive.
Sure.
I certainly won't argue that. But on top of release engineering, I'm also involved with the cluster admin team. So maintaining the FreeBSD project's resources and the FreeBSD Foundation's resources are also part of what I do.
Oh, very cool. Sounds like you're a pretty busy guy, Glenn.
Yes.
Yes, I've definitely seen that firsthand, watching the interactions with Glenn and other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun though. It's I can't imagine being involved with any other project. FreeBSD project it's the community is just fantastic. They're knowledgeable. You always have somebody who knows a lot of information about whatever question you have, and that it's really the community is what's really kept me with this project. I couldn't imagine being this involved with any other project.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And you come out to a number of the conferences too. Are you going to be with us in Malta in a couple weeks?
I wish I was going to be.
Oh, okay.
No,
next time, right?
Oh, definitely. I'm not going to make Malta this year.
Okay.
Actually, the BSD Can 2013 was only my second conference I was at.
It's only my second one as well.
Oh, okay.
So
you're going to be, how about VBSD Con in Virginia later? Or do you have any more planned for the year?
I believe I'm going to, I don't believe there's any other ones I'm going to, but I will be at VBSD Con.
Oh, well, I'll see you there.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely. Me too.
So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I know you're very busy, especially right now, the middle of the double release cycle, but we thank you very much for talking to us.
And next up on the show, the places to be, SD. We're going to go ahead and take a look at upcoming events and what's on the schedule for the future here, Alan.
Yep, so in addition to EuroBSDCon coming up in just over 2 weeks, and VBSDCon coming up at the end of October, at the start of November, we have the IX Systems FreeBSD Anniversary Party.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, full disclosure, that's the company that I work for, the corporate sponsor of PCBSD, and they do know how to throw a good party. So what's this one for? This is for the 20th anniversary?
20th anniversary of FreeBSD, which was just over the summer.
Oh, fantastic. It looks like it's going to be held down at the DNA Lounge in San Francisco. Yep. So if you're anywhere in the Bay Area, try and get out there November 2nd. That promises to be a good time.
And quite a few notable FreeBSD people will be there. So if you've ever wanted to meet some of the cool people, it's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Put some faces to the names or the IRC handles, and however you communicate with the community.
Yep.
So next up, we're going to take a look at the news. What's been happening in the world of BSD this last week? What's the first thing we got going on here, Alan?
We got NetBSD gets support for the QB board 1 and 2, which are these basically new ARM boards.
Okay.
And they have support for that, and
looks like they're based on the Allwinner A10s and A20 chips. Okay, very cool. Looks like Matt Thomas contributed that. Next up in the news, we got a cool article here about Ray servers ditching Linux for BSD. So what's up with that, Alan?
They had used Windows, Mac, OpenBSD, and Linux and so on in the past, but they found that in order to do what they needed to do, they needed PF, ZFS, disk encryption, lots of networking features, good security, separation of the base and the packages, and they found that the only place they got all of those things together in one package was with FreeBSD.
Oh, very, very cool. Another comment, they had made something about the new C groups-based memory on Linux.
Yeah.
They're having a problem with that, it sounds like.
Yeah, apparently they had 256 gigabytes of memory in the system, but the memory management system was throwing out-of-memory errors even though they were using only about 40 gigabytes of that memory.
See, so if you get 512, you can now go up to 80 gigabytes. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah. So next we have high-performance networking for OpenSSH 6.2.
Okay. And this is the separate patch set that's maintained from OpenSSH and against FreeBSD, I assume?
Well, no, this patch is for the base OpenSSH and OpenBSD.
Oh, okay. Excellent, excellent. So this was recently updated to support OpenSSH 6.2. It also includes threaded AES CTR support to increase performance and take advantage of multiple CPU cores for encryption.
Yeah, because previously, when you were trying to do a file, an SCP copy over your gigabit LAN, you wouldn't max out the gigabit LAN because you'd max out your CPU first, right? You'd hit the limit of one core of encryption performance. So now that that's threaded, it means you can use more of your CPU and get the data across your network faster.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, multi-threads just makes everything better.
And so HPN has been part of FreeBSD since 9.0. That was for OpenSSH 5.8. But so because it's a separate patch set, it's not part of the base OpenSSH, so they have to update the patch set for each new version. And so they've done that now for 6.2. And you can get the updated 6.2 on your FreeBSD system now, if you like, from the security/OpenSSH-portable port. Which will let you have the latest version on your system instead of the version that is pinned to FreeBSD 9.
So it looks like in addition to this, they separated out the NUN cipher as well, so it's in its own patch?
Yeah, so the NUN cipher used to be included as part of the HPN patch in the 5.8 series, but for 6.2, the NUN cipher is a completely separate patch. What the NUN cipher allows you to do is, after you do the login process over the encrypted connection, it switches to using no encryption for the file copy part of the process. Because if you're just copying files over SSH from server 1 to server 2 over your LAN, you don't necessarily want to waste the CPU time encrypting all that traffic since it's going over your LAN and no one can be eavesdropping on it anyway.
Yeah, or if you're just uploading public files or packages anyway,
Exactly.
it's not that big a deal.
But that's a separate patch now to make the two easier to maintain.
Good to know. Next up, we got a call for testing, OpenSSH 6.3 now. Looks like this is mostly a bug fix release. SFTP now supports resuming partially downloaded or uploaded transfers. That'll be handy. More logging features. And still, what is this here? 6 weeks after the initial email, still no release?
Yep. Well, not enough testing done yet.
Okay, well, get out there and test it, guys. Could use the feedback.
The next news item is package source, which is the ports-like system for NetBSD, I think OpenBSD, and the default in Dragonfly. Now has support for signing as packages. This actually comes from EdgeBSD, which is a new fork of NetBSD that's designed to be more aggressive and less conservative. So they're using GPG to actually sign the package files.
Oh, interesting. So they're pushing along some NetBSD development a little faster. That's cool. So it looks like it's a patch in GitHub still in its infancy, and there's a little how-to up there as well if you want to go ahead and take a look at that. And so next up, we got it looks like a new article here, FreeBSD versus Linux, 10 points of superiority. Looks like a new FreeBSD user, an ex-Linux user, writes about his experience during the conversion.
Yeah, so he switched over from Linux to FreeBSD, and he writes about the 10 things he likes most now that he's switched.
Okay, and that's up on the FreeBSD forums as well. We should have the link up in the notes later. Feel free to definitely give that a read.
It's quite a popular thread over there, actually.
Okay, next up, feedback and questions from you, the audience. We received a ton of email after the first episode last week, so obviously we're not going to be able to answer everything. But we'll go ahead and pick out a few from this last week, and anything else you send in, we'll try and answer them in future episodes.
For sure. Keep telling us your ideas for the show, what you think, good things and bad things, what we got to change, and send us your questions or who you'd like to see interviewed or whatever you'd like to tell us. It's feedback@bsdnow.tv.
And of course, we'll take questions on Twitter or any way you want to get them to us. So the first thing we got here, Hoopla writes in, I'm looking to install PCBSD on my laptop and was wondering if there was support for encryption of the root folder in the installer. For my Arch Linux install, I ended up setting up encrypted LVM by hand, and it was hell. But if it was built in the installer, it would make the transition to BSD much, much simpler. So here's the skinny on that, Hoopla. PCBSD 9.2 and higher, we've actually depreciated the full disk encryption option for a couple reasons. We've deferred it in place of using PEFS encryption. Difference is PEFS is going to allow us to encrypt files on top of the ZFS zpool. We use it for encrypting your home directory, for example, all your home files, etc. And doing it this way gives us a couple cool features. We're able to do replication of your zpool to a remote disk or system, and you don't have to worry about being sent across the wire unencrypted now, because if it's encrypted,
stored unencrypted on the other side.
Under ZFS, yeah, definitely. You don't have to worry about the security on the remote side as well. So we've deferred using PEFS for that. In addition, for boot environment support. If you're not familiar with ZFS boot environments from Solaris, that's something new we've brought into PCBSD 9.2. What that's going to allow you to do is create an instant snapshot of your entire system. That'll be your kernel, your world, your packages, pretty much your whole desktop or server, whatever you're running. And if something goes wrong, you just reboot, pick the previous boot environment, and boot up. If we do full disk encryption, you're going to lose some of that functionality, because full disk encryption is going to require the kernel and other bits of it to be on a UFS partition, which wouldn't do boot environments properly.
Yeah. So PEFS actually gets us a little closer to the idea of how encryption in ZFS was supposed to work than you know, the way we're doing it in full disk encryption, where you're doing it under ZFS.
Sure, we're trying to do it on top of, which works really well, and being able to keep it unmounted. One of the cool features about PEFS that really got my attention was it has a PAM module. And what that does is when you boot up the system now, instead of asking for your encryption key during the boot up process, you can actually get to the login prompt and your home directory is still encrypted until you actually log in with your password. And that's the decryption key at that point. And if you log back out again, want to re-encrypt, you just log out and it re-encrypts your home directory. You're not going to have to shut the system down all the way to ensure we got re-encrypted again.
Yeah, that's quite an advantage if you're on a multi-user system where you're not the only person that uses a computer.
Oh, definitely. Yes, definitely. So it had some unique advantages for us. So that was a couple of reasons why we deferred to using that as opposed to Jelly. So next question here, Jurgen writes in, hi guys, I want to listen to the new BSD podcast, but I couldn't find the RSS feed. Could you publish the feed?
Yeah, the feed's up now. Basically, because of the way Jupiter Broadcasting publishes shows, there's no RSS feed until there's an episode. And so we didn't have the RSS feed until the first episode was finished, which was a couple days after we recorded it. But now if you go to bsdnow.tv, in the top right there are feeds for the MP3 or OGG versions, SD and HD video, or to download it as a torrent. And we also got approved for iTunes on Monday. So we'll be there
so
as well.
Yeah, so look for us in the iTunes store. So Sam now writes in with a couple questions. I wanted a few simple Python web apps. What's the best FreeBSD way to deploy this? Nginx with UWSGI. It's surprisingly hard to find a usable Nginx right now that I can throw in a jail and run a Python app. What do you got to say to that, Alan?
Well, running Nginx in a jail isn't any different than running it anywhere else. So
sure. Yeah,
if you install Python and UWSGI or whatever, that works. I mostly work with PHP, so I have Nginx and then PHP FPM, and I pointed at a pool. I even have, in some instances, jails on each of 5 servers, and the web server load balances across those 5 jails on 5 different physical machines.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've not really found this to be too difficult. Typically, once you get the jail set up, and you can use utility like Easy Jails or Warden or something out there to manage it. Once it's set up, you just log into it, and for all intents and purposes, it's just another FreeBSD box. So next question here. The PCBSD tools are great, but the tool versions that are in the ports tree are always out of date compared to what ships with PCBSD. Why is this? Same with FreeNAS. Why is the Warden more up to date in FreeNAS than PCBSD? Then yet there's a third version in
So
ports.
I guess you're the person to ask for that.
Yeah, I suppose I can comment on this one. So what's going on here is the FreeBSD ports tree is actually, in Git, is actually set up to be easily converted to a port. I just don't personally have the time to sit there and update the FreeBSD port every week, do tinderbox runs, and see what's changed. I mean, I stay busy enough rolling our own packages. This would be a perfect opportunity if you're a ports committer or want to become one to get involved. I mean, we've done most of the work for you, and I'll gladly give you a hand if I can to make that happen. I just need somebody who's willing to spend the time on a weekly basis or whatever to update the port.
Yeah, and as a person who just recently learned how to write his own port, there's the handbook for running FreeBSD. There's also the porter's handbook, which explains everything you need to know to make a port from scratch. And in this case, you don't even have to do that. You just have to take the existing one and update it. So it's just a matter of changing a couple of variables and throwing in new files or whatever, making sure it works, and then making a patch and sending that as a PR, and it can get approved by someone else, and you can have the newer version in there quite quickly.
And if you annoy people enough with too many patches, they might throw a commit bid at you to go away.
With ports, you actually get assigned a mentor, and you work through the process, and you can update all kinds of apps, and become quite an important part of the community.
Yeah, definitely. So there's definitely a place there if somebody wants to step up and take over that portion of it. Again, I'll help, and most of the work's been done in our Git repo already. It just needs somebody with a little bit of time who's willing to keep it up to date.
Generate the diffs. And
I tried in the past. I just I only have two hands, and so I only type so many words per minute, and there's a lot of other things to do in the week.
So yeah, if you find those tools very helpful, it might be nice if you helped maintain that port so that you and everyone else always have the latest version in the port tree.
And if you still need it, we do have a full package repo where those utilities are updated just about every 2 weeks. So you could always add our package.ng repo and pull those down in package form as well.
So the next one is a really long question.
Yeah, I'll let you read this one here.
So Frank writes in with a really long question. He says, also Frank wishes to remain anonymous, so Frank's not his real name, but anyway. His company is a major certificate authority, and they currently virtualize Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 with KVM and have about 3,000 nodes serving different purposes across about 350 1U machines running Red Hat Enterprise Linux and KVM. And they have kind of a sales issue there. They want to have TLS 1.2 support and the new ECC ciphers. So to do that, they need to compile the newer version of OpenSSL and Nginx across those other system packages. They've tried building the RPMs, but they still run into issues, especially on a default install. And the fact that on Linux, base stuff and packages are kind of they're not separated like they are in BSD, so it's much harder to update the OpenSSL. And then their other issue is that their core business software is Java based, and so they have all kinds of funds with that. So now they've got all of this working using FreeBSD as the guest in these KVM virtual machines. And they've found that it provides much better performance. They actually need about 30% fewer VMs running to do the same amount of work, as opposed to if they use Red Hat as the guest. So I wonder how much better that gets if they use Virtio and stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely significant.
And it all works with their existing configuration management stack, which is Puppet and some homegrown stuff. So it allows them to kind of do just drop in these virtual nodes and have them run BSD instead, and means they need fewer of those physical machines, so they have that much more slack in their capacity they can use for other things. And save some Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So his team likes FreeBSD and has knowledge about it and can support the migration and have all the metrics to show how it's actually going to save them that 30%. However, management is not happy with it and doesn't want us to do such a big migration. What management doesn't know is that already about 100 of their VMs are running FreeBSD and is working perfectly fine.
Get it in the back door there, nobody will notice until it's too late.
The management doesn't like the fact that they've already paid for a 10-year contract with Red Hat, and in the end, they'll still save money by using FreeBSD, but they've kind of bought into the Red Hat thing. So in the end, he's asking, how can he convince his management to let him switch to FreeBSD?
Oh gosh, that's a toughie, right?
The first thing that came to my mind was a presentation that was at BSDCan in May of this year, actually called Case Study Switching from Linux to FreeBSD. And it was specifically about the steps to take to convince management to make the switch. Especially since a lot of management types, they've heard of Linux, right? Some of them don't know what it is, but
Sure.
most of them have heard of it and understand kind of what it is. But a lot of people haven't heard of FreeBSD. And so switching from that thing they kind of know about to something they don't makes them nervous. And so this goes through, I think there's about 7 steps of getting, the people to convince them and to get them to buy into it and how to make the transition.
Yeah, just because it has the word free and it doesn't mean it doesn't work or anything. And we've run into that in other places as well.
It was like, oh, if it's free, it can't be any good. It's like, well, not exactly.
Right. You're like, okay, well, you got your checkbook. Go ahead and give me something here. It's not free anymore,
Yes,
right?
exactly. You can always pay me for it if you really wish.
That's right. Send a donation into the FreeBSD Foundation if it makes you feel better. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, so just pulling up the presentation here, their 7 steps for convincing management was 1, to understand the need for the change, 2, enlist a core change team to actually enact it, 3, envisage, develop the vision and strategy of what you're actually trying to change, 4, motivate, create a sense of urgency and make them understand why we need to switch to FreeBSD right now, not when our Red Hat contract expires. And then
Well, and definitely, if you got 100 VMs already running, I would imagine the case would be pretty easy to make. Like, we've done this, it works.
And if
this is not an unknown.
If we do this, it makes the upgrade to the TLS 1.2 easier, and we get this 30% performance boost, and so on. Step 5 is communicate. Make them understand the vision that you've come up with and how doing this will be a good thing. And then step 6 is act and actually take the action. And then 7 is to consolidate and tie up all the loose ends. So anyway,
Cool. I hope that'll be helpful to Frank or Anonymous.
So I linked in the show notes to the BSD CAN page, and it has a link to the YouTube video of the entire presentation, including the slides. So you can go through that and see if it. And I don't know. Do you have any other tips for convincing people to switch?
Yeah, it should be pretty self-explanatory if you've done it and the metrics support it. Unless it's just a name recognition thing that they're dealing with, I guess I would point them at the wealth of materials out there. Go look around. This is not some new OS that just kind of cropped up out of nowhere. There's a lot of big companies running it. You start dropping names like, oh, Netflix switched to this. They seem to be okay with it. I mean, come on. Like, it's not as scary as it seems at first.
There's a big Wikipedia page with a list of people that use FreeBSD. The FreeBSD Foundation has their sponsor page, which has logos from a bunch of big companies that might help as well, and things like that. But yeah, just showing someone the handbook, and then, if they know that there's nothing equivalent to that in Linux, they'll be like, oh.
Oh, yeah, maybe there's a good reason here. Yeah.
So yeah, that's about all the questions we have time for today. But
But definitely keep sending them in, guys. Send us long ones, short ones, doesn't matter. If it's a good question, we'll do our best to try and answer it in next week's episode.
Because if you want to know, somebody else probably wants to know too.
Sure, and it's good stuff. It's just increasing knowledge about BSD in general. And again, if it's a burning question you've wanted to know for forever, if it's something PCBSD specific, I'll try and personally speak to that a little bit. But we'll take any and all about the BSD community.
I guess just some general housekeeping. The tutorial, the full text version, which actually has more than what I showed, is on our website, bsdnow.tv. It'll be posted in a couple of minutes after the live stream is over. What else was there?
Well, one thing I was going to mention, too, in relation to the last question here is there are companies out there that will provide support for FreeBSD if that's an issue where they need to feel like they have somebody they can get on the phone.
Yeah.
And solve a problem.
You can't get a support contract for FreeBSD.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many names I should mention, but there are a few out there that do that.
We might have mentioned one of them earlier in the show.
Yes. The Easter egg earlier in the show, right?
But yes, please send us more feedback at bsdnow.tv.
Also, we don't necessarily check all the YouTube comments or Reddit or etc. So please send us email or Twitter. It will also be acceptable if you want us to be able to see what you're sending in.
Those make it the easiest for us to consolidate and pull all the questions from one place.
Mm-hmm. And of course, if you want to get the raw, unedited video, watch us live Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
1800 UTC. And we also have a chat room, Jupiter Broadcasting on irc.geekshed.net. If you go to jblive.tv, there's a chat room embedded under the video. I'll add a link to the bsdnow.tv site so that people can find the IRC.
Okay. Yeah, we'd love to take your questions on there if we can answer them during the show as well.
And there's other people in the chat room that can help answer your questions, and they get to yell at us during the show and tell us when we do things wrong. And
yep. It makes it more entertaining for all of us.
But again, thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching. I look forward to seeing you guys next week with some new news about BSD and another exciting interview.